Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. Coming up a little bit later in the show, we'll see some Germans from Russia childhood memories. But first, our guest now is the president of North Dakota United, Nick Archuleta. Nick, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
As we get started, tell the folks a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure. I was born in San Francisco, though my mother was from North Dakota. She grew up on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation in a little community which is now underwater. But she instilled in us at a very young age a love of education, and so it was no surprise that I went into it. I started teaching in Minnesota, moved to Bismarck, North Dakota, and taught at Century High School. And in 2013, I was elected president of North Dakota United. Then it was North Dakota Education Association.
Okay, so what is North Dakota United?
North Dakota United is a union of public employees. So we have as members, we have higher ed faculty, we have K-12 faculty, we have folks that plow your roads in the winter and fix them in the summer. We have one of our vice presidents is in the tax department at the state. We have a wonderful array of public employees that are in every community across the state. Now,
when was North Dakota United formed? But you said it started one and became North Dakota United.
Right, it did. North Dakota United is the merged union of North Dakota Public Employees Association and the North Dakota Education Association. We found ourselves over the course of several years working on legislation that benefited each other, and we thought, both boards thought it might be a good idea for us to investigate merger. And so over the course of a couple of years, we did investigate it and found that it made a lot of sense. And so we combined our groups, and in 2013, September 1st of that year, we became North Dakota United.
Yeah. So what are the duties that your organization routinely oversees and performs?
Well, we represent the interests of higher ed faculty and these other constituent groups that I've mentioned before, and we represent them in the legislature. We want to make sure that their voices are amplified in the halls of the legislature, and we provide lobbying on their behalf and information to legislators who, and otherwise they're so busy in those 80 days they don't have time to learn every single aspect of the things that they're voting on, and we help to provide background information so that they can make the best decisions possible.
Now, of course, obviously your group's involved somewhat in politics, but involved with endorsements and the like?
Yeah, we do that. We have what's called UPAC. It's our Political Action Committee. And we meet and we examine the records of legislators like several other groups do across the state and across the country. And we make recommendations to our members based upon how those individuals have voted. For example, in this year so far, we have made recommendations on behalf to vote for 11 Democrats and 11 Republicans. So we try to be as nonpartisan as possible, and we look at the record and let that do the speaking for them.
Okay. So let's talk about some recent budget challenges within the state and how it does impact your group. First, how does it affect public employees?
Well, as you know, the state budget underwent 2 allotments last time out, and as a result, the state agencies were forced to really tighten their belt. Well, it's a little like that story of they asked the bank robber, hey, why do you rob banks? And he says, well, that's where the money is. Where do you cut your budgets? You cut it in personnel. And that's what happened to public employees. Many public employees were discontinued. Jobs that were vacant were left unfilled. And the impact of that then is that you have fewer people providing these vital services that the public of North Dakota depends on every single day. You have fewer of those people actually working to provide those services. And they're working twice as hard with less help.
Mm-hmm. What about then higher education?
Higher education was frankly, I wouldn't say necessarily devastated, but it was hit very, very hard. And I can tell you that if you take a look at some campuses, they don't have anything left to cut. They have trimmed their budgets, they've trimmed their staff as much as possible. There's an interesting thing about North Dakota State University. Their English department used to have, I believe, 7 members in that faculty, full-time members. They're down to 3, and I think maybe they've been allowed to hire 1 back. But that is a department on the campus of NDSU that touches every single student there twice. Once when they come in as freshmen for the intro to English stuff, and then when they're preparing to graduate, they learn technical writing and other things. So that is a department, frankly, that was small by comparison to other universities like NDSU around the country and the region in the first place, and now it's smaller. So those folks are working twice as hard as they had to in the past.
Mm-hmm. So what are the group's views then on Governor Burgum's proposal to reinvent higher education?
Well, I think we're still waiting to find out what that is. As we tape this show, I know that they've met. I don't know that they have really come to any conclusions about what that whole thing is going to look like. We're hoping that they come to the conclusion that it's an investment. When you have tenured faculty, that's an investment not just in the university itself, but an investment in the future of North Dakota. We know that people who are going to be our leaders in the next generation are going to need high quality education beyond high school. Now, for some people, that'll mean a 2-year degree. For other people, that'll mean a traditional 4-year liberal arts degree. But whatever it is, whatever route those students take, we want to make sure that they have a highly functioning, high quality faculty to provide that education.
Okay. Then what about K through 12, education, teachers and the like?
Yeah, now K-12 was spared some of the budget cutting that had to go on with the other state agencies as well as higher ed, because we had something, frankly, that the previous legislatures provided, and that was the Foundation Aid Stabilization Fund. Back in the 80s, we had school districts that were going to the bank to make payroll. Well, the legislature then said, that's not any way to run the business here, so let's create this fund, and that's what they did. And so with the passage of Measure 2, which North Dakota United was strongly behind, it allowed the legislature to use up to $300 million of that Foundation Aid Stabilization Fund money. In their wisdom, they only used $295 million, leaving a little seed money there, and that money then, that fund will be replenished over time from tax revenues from oil. It hasn't replenished as quickly this time out as we had hoped it would be, so we are very, very concerned going into this next legislative session that there won't be that well to draw from for K-12.
Well, that is my next question, because then what are the big needs looking into 2019 session, and how concerned are you over budget issues again?
Well, we are very concerned about the budget issues. First of all, not even accounting for any extra monies, we do know that we have a rising student population, and they have to be educated as well. And public education is really unique in this way. We endeavor to educate every single kid that walks, rolls, is carried, or runs through those schoolhouse doors. That's our obligation. And so we can't just kind of educate them, we have to educate them. And we're working on their behalf all the time to make sure that they have access to the best education that we can possibly provide. So when we're looking at some of the big items, we really want to see this innovation bill take off, because I really think that that is a key to educating that workforce and making them choice ready when they graduate. There are other big needs. There are some schools, frankly, as you travel around the state, that need to be replaced. They've outlived their expected life, and they do need to be replaced. Will there be money for that? I don't know. But every kid deserves to learn in a modern school building.
Yeah. Well, let's jump over to, I guess, do you think the oil revenue was mismanaged to some degree that caused some of the 2017 issues?
I'm not exactly certain. I'm not an expert on taxes or that particular policy. I do know that I get asked a lot, hey, where did that money go? And I'm sure there's some study being done right now that is going to be looking into that. And that is a good question. I hope we find the answer.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about, you mentioned bipartisan or nonpartisan is what you said, but talk about some of your collaboration and bipartisan efforts.
Yeah, we work with the other stakeholders in education in North Dakota very well, I think. You sometimes, when you read the newspaper or you hear the news, sometimes the impression that comes across is that you have this wholly adversarial relationship with school boards. Well, sometimes it is. I mean, when you're negotiating for the terms and conditions of your employment, sometimes those sides don't see eye to eye. However, most of the time when we are advocating for policy, we are on the same side. And so we work well with the School Boards Association. We work well with the North Dakota Council of Education Leaders, who represent the administrators, because I think we all have a united vision, if you will, about where we want to see education go. We want the very best for our students. We always assume best intentions, and when there are disagreements, there will be disagreements. But I think big picture, which is what we need to look at, I think we're all on the same side. So we work with them. We are working now with foundations. In fact, I sit on the board of the NEA Foundation Board, the National Education Association Foundation Board, and I've been working with them about getting a grant into our state to take a look at the challenges of rural education, and particularly among our Native American population. As you may know, the state of North Dakota graduates on time, 89%, which is very high. Of our graduates. Native American graduation rates are about 69%. But we know this, that when Native American students take 2 CTE classes, those are career and technical education classes in the same area, their graduation rate rises to the state average. So why aren't we doing more about that? So that's one area that we're going to look at if we are awarded this grant from the foundation.
Well, very open-ended here.
Sure.
What is going on in education right now?
I think the biggest thing in North Dakota that's going on is the innovation bill that was passed last session, Senate Bill 2186. Nicole Pullman, who was a champion of that, Senator Aaron Oban, who was a champion of that bill, and here's a big shout out to Senator Don Shively. That thing was dead a couple of times, and proving he is kind of a master of how to be a great committee chair, he brought that thing back and actually found funding in a very tough budget year. So we got that bill passed, and now we're watching and waiting for communities to say, hey, we want something better for our kids too. Now, it shouldn't be just assumed that, hey, there's nothing innovative going on in education prior to the legislature saying so. North Dakota teachers have been very innovative for a very long time, and so have some school boards as well as administrators. They've always wanted to see what would happen if you take off the shackles. So what this bill allows is for the superintendent of public instruction, Kirsten Baszler in this case, to waive some rules like seat time. All school learning doesn't occur in the 8 hours that you're in school. A lot of it occurs outside. So for example, if you have a young lady who's taking a CTE course in welding, for example, and she has a part-time job at the local implement dealer, and she uses welding in her job, she should get credit for that. Because that's the way it's going to be. And innovative bills, innovation that we've seen so far, there's a terrific teacher by the name of Ryan Townsend at Simley Middle School in Bismarck, which is right next to Hillside Park. Well, in the conversation he had with his kids and in his class, they noticed that, geez, there are several homeless people in that park. And then another kid noticed, but a lot of them have cell phones. And then so they had this discussion, well, why would they have cell phones? Well, that was their connection to services like health services or job services or things on that order. And then another kid noted, hey, how do they charge them? They can't, plug them into a tree, or they can't come into the school, and nobody knew where do they charge them. And so they thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we had solar-powered charging stations in that park? And so then a collaborative effort was enjoined, and you had kids that had to deal with the city forester and the city government. And then you had to have the people in the science wing of that things looking at photovoltaic cells and how do we get these things mounted and the different permissions you need and all that other stuff. And they came up with a project to serve the community. And that's what the innovative bill, I think, will unleash, is kids solving real world problems on their own. And that's the best thing.
Well, I've heard about you've been out and going to go out, I guess, on your listening tours.
Right.
So what are those?
Well, I'm about, a quarter of the way through. It is our intention to visit with every single member that we can reach face to face. And what we want to do is to listen to our members to find out exactly what it is they want from their union, what are the challenges in their workplaces, what can we do as a union to help them mitigate some of those challenges and issues that they're seeing. And basically what we're doing is we're capturing all this information, and we are going to create a vision for our union that will help inform and drive the work that we do. And frankly, in the stops that I've made so far, it is an incredible I don't know, an understanding, an incredible understanding that these are the most caring people that I've ever run across. They will do anything for the kids they serve. They will do anything for the public that they serve. It is really outstanding public service.
Now, how many members do you have?
We have 11,500 members across the state.
11,500, yeah. And the biggest percentage of those are what?
K-12 teachers, okay. Right now. But we're growing the areas of higher ed, and we're growing. We're attempting to grow even more in public employees.
Yeah. With that said, in some of your listening posts, you know, what about classroom safety? With what's been going on in the nation, well, in the recent past and for years or a few years now, it's becoming more and more of an issue for teachers and probably for the children too, but you're working with the teachers.
Yes, in those, every one of these listening stops so far, school safety has come up. In fact, we had last year 2 very large districts, Fargo Public Schools District and the Bismarck Public Schools, went to impasse in part on that issue of safety. Teachers shouldn't have to expect to be hurt when they go to school. And this year so far, there was a small school up in northwestern North Dakota where a teacher was stabbed with a scissor, some of them are routinely hit, spit upon, and you hear these things, and they're terrible, and they shouldn't happen. So what we're hoping to do is to advocate for policies in these schools and actually put some of these things, not so much in the policy book, but in the negotiated agreement, that we have some real rules that we have to follow to ensure the safety of the staff as well as the other students in the class. It is not unusual to hear a story, I'm sorry to say, that where an entire class has to be moved out so that a young person who's in that classroom who's having some behavioral issues has basically an episode where they're a danger to their classmates. So what we hope is that eventually we can shine a light on this and make sure that the access to behavioral health and to mental health services are improved for everybody in North Dakota, but particularly in the rural areas.
Yeah, and there you go. Your members got to be more and more concerned about mental health and behavioral health, right, and even addiction that seems to be bleeding more into the classroom. And so how much more can you do on this?
Well, what we can do, I mean, we're not the government, and we're not the school board, but what we can do is to help gather enough data that shows that the problem is real, that it exists, and then help and work with our partners in education and with our legislature to come up with some common sense, affordable remedies for this, for the problem. At one of the listening stop tours, a gentleman who's been teaching for quite some time made this. There's no hard data behind it, but there is, his is totally anecdotal, but he said a lot of these students that he's seeing matriculate through the system now are the children of some of those folks who had issues when that first meth epidemic came through North Dakota. Mm-hmm. So if those folks who are now parents of these kids, if they didn't get help for their underlying issues earlier, what chance do those students have? So we need to make sure that addiction services, that mental health, and behavioral health remedies are readily available to everybody in North Dakota.
Good luck to you, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Stay tuned for more. Germans from Russia children growing up in rural South Dakota during the Great Depression were no strangers to hard work. When that one-room schoolhouse bell rang in the fall, it was like a vacation from the daily grind of farming. They knew that education was their ticket to a better life.
I look upon my childhood with fondness. I wouldn't want to relive it, but I am who I am because of it.
You know, the one thing about growing up in those kind of circumstances, we didn't think we were poor, you know. But when you look back, we were at poverty level. We were working for other people, and they had hired my father. My mother would take care of the cooking and things like that for the hired men and people. But at that point, Dad said they hadn't hired me. So now I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to milk cows or any of that stuff.
I grew up on a farm. It was a grain farm, basically. We had a variety of animals, cattle of course, milked a lot of cows by hand. You worked from before sunup to long after sundown, and there never seemed to be an end of it. We looked forward to school. School for us was a vacation.
We were in a one-room school. The little one sat in the front, and we didn't have indoor plumbing. We had outhouses, and it was just a typical farm school, you know. They had a rule, the older children in school were supposed to speak English out on the playground. Everybody I knew was German, and we all talked German, and we just sat in the front row, you know, in school, and the older kids were behind us, and they all were being taught in English, so we kind of learned it.
I had an advantage. I was the fourth child, and so I had older brothers and sisters who were already in country school, and my mother was very adamant about education.
I went to 13 schools in 12 years, back in the days when people didn't travel around very much. It was a big deal to go to the next county. And, you know, I did grades 1, 2, and 3 in my very comfortable school. I went to Detroit. I started the first month in a big city school with all kinds of people I had never had any connection with in my life. I was afraid of them. I didn't know how to jump rope. I mean, we chased gophers. And came back, and then I lived in town for 2 years. So now I was a town child and running around the streets with the town kids, fighting the farm kids on Saturday night.
I graduated from Jackson number 1, Happy Land School, all 8th grades.
There was no question I went to grade school. When it came time for high school, I had to fight. Because my dad, he didn't think I needed high school. Girls just got married anyhow.
My father would have had us conclude our education at the end of country school. He felt by going to town school, we'd just pick up smart aleck ideas.
I just knew I wanted to go to school, and I fought for it. I remember standing out in the cow barn while he was milking, arguing with him. And they finally said, well, you can go 1 year. I got my foot in the door. Never took it back out. I graduated.
My mother was very adamant about education. She felt that the world was changing, and in many ways she was a very foresighted woman. And she said all of the children must have an education, high school education. Dad's role was different. He had to providing for a family of 8, and with the Depression and losing his wife's farm, we became renters then, and it wasn't until after World War II, when my brothers came back from the Second World War, that we finally were able to repurchase a farm.
What kept me in school was that I wanted to work in an office. I had seen movies with these girls that worked in offices, and I thought, boy, that's what I want.
One of the reasons I think I eventually went into teaching was because of my 4th and 5th grade teacher. LaViolet Druitt was my 4th grade teacher. She liked us. She not only looked good, she smelled good to us farm kids. The sad part of it was Miss LaViolet decided to get married after the first year, but before she left, she promised that we would get an equally good teacher, and believe it or not, her sister, LaVon Druitt, became our 5th grade teacher, and she was just as good as LaViolet. Country school for us was escape from the hard work of the farm, the milking, the morning milking, the mucking of the barns, the hay in the winter months, and all of the other summer activities of shocking grains, stacking hay. Those were work days, and I was not a farmer. Happiest day of my life was when I finally got the scholarship to leave the farm.
Life is what it is when it's going on around you, and you just accept it as a child.
It was survival, it was existence, it was not luxurious, and yet we made the best of it.
Well, that's all we have on Prairie Pulse for this week. But as always, thanks for watching.
Funding for Minnesota Legacy programs are provided by a grant from the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008, and by the members of Prairie Public.